The rapid pace of technological advance in the drone wars, guided by artificial intelligence in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world, has fundamentally changed the face of conflict. And there is a question about how radical the change is, an evolution or is it a revolution of warfare? And it's causing all sorts of headaches for governments worldwide, and particularly in Europe right now, the choices of what to invest billions in the immediate future. And the multi-award winning Wall Street Journal correspondent Yaroslav Trofimov has been investigating the question of how radical the transformation is becoming, and whether investing billions in tanks, in planes, in warships on the battlefield is going to become the equivalent of buying horses and arrows on the eve of machine guns and howitzers. For his latest piece, and we can cross to Dubai. We can bring in Yaroslav. Great to see you. Good to have you back on the programme, Yaroslav.
Great to be back.
Now, Yaroslav Trofimov is the Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent of the Wall Street Journal. He's author of No Country for Love. He's also the author of Our Enemies Will Vanish, the Russian invasion, Ukraine's war of independence, and also the siege of Mecca. Now, let's go to the point of your piece, actually. You take a deep dive, and there are kind of hundreds of billions of dollars you talk about being invested by the US, its allies, in rivals as well, on tanks, planes, warships. And you pose this question of actually how quickly it could basically be useless in comparison. What conclusion did you come to?
Well, it's very early to say whether it's a revolution or an evolution. And usually the revolutions are only apparent once they happen. So I think what is clear to everyone involved, to the governments, to the military commanders, to defense companies, is that the speed of change is extremely, extremely high right now. And that's because of the war between Russia and Ukraine that has been going on for 4 years and a half, which forced the Ukrainians, the Russians, and the countries that are backing each of them to really speed up with the innovation. And at the same time, we've also seen a technological revolution that is enabling all of this. And so I think one big takeaway is that artificial intelligence and autonomy is becoming more and more important in the battlefield. Right now, in the occupied part of southern Ukraine, there are dozens, maybe hundreds of autonomous drones that are roaming the highways and are using the AI-enabled cameras to recognize Russian fuel tanks, Russian military vehicles, to pursue them. For now, there is still a human in the loop that is making the final decision, but a lot of the of this hunt has been already automated. And we also see it with the changes in the basic military doctrine, with the application of things such as artillery. Remember we used to talk 2-3 years ago about how important it is for European countries, for the US, to ramp up the production of artillery shells, because it was an artillery war early in this conflict. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? Now, artillery is not really used that much in the battlefield because the range of a howitzer, which is 30, 40 kilometers, is smaller than the range of a drone. So these artillery guns can fire 1 or 2 shots and then very often destroyed. So you're seeing all these changes. It's also, however, not clear what will be the next iteration, because every 6 months technologies change. And maybe there will be an answer to drones. Maybe there will be something else in the next few years. And I think the lesson that everybody is learning from this is that you have to be able to be very flexible. So every military, every defense ministry, every defense company have to be able to take the technologies that are developing in these battlefields and to adopt them within weeks, sometimes within months, because a lot of this weaponry becomes obsolete very quickly now.
Let me talk about tanks, Yaroslav, because I think a lot of people are wondering that the speed of the warfare here, to what extent are they still used on the battlefield?
Well, if you look at the battlefield in Ukraine, they're not really used that much. They're used sometimes hidden as artillery pieces. But in this new kind of war where every movement is seen by hundreds, sometimes thousands of sensors, these tanks get picked off well before they arrive at the front line. So well before they can be of any use by swarms of drones. And so the Russians have still continued to send tank columns until last year, but it's very, very rare. And I guess there is no place more dangerous now in the battlefield than next to a tank. Now the question is, what will happen next? Will the tanks become autonomous? Will there be kind of drone tanks. Will the tanks be used because of the armor to transport unmanned aerial vehicles and sort of the flying drones? So all these weapon systems will evolve over time and become something else. The same goes for planes. And is there a future for manned aircraft? Right now, communications issues require a pilot to be there because they're not that stable. But with the development of artificial intelligence, will there be a need for a piloted aircraft? And some companies like Helsing in Germany, they've already tested flying fighter jets like the Swedish Gripen using autonomy. So all of this is a big issue because when governments are investing all these hundreds of billions now, especially in Europe, and this built up, they have to make plans for 10, 15 years ahead.
And if we look, I mean, there is a solid parallel here because it is a very profound question, and it sounds, obvious when you raise it because the speed of change in a war. If we go back to the First World War, if we go back to cavalries, they were a thing right at the start. I think the Germans had something like 100,000 strong, and they were used for pushing the front lines. And suddenly they disappeared within a year. So our history books tell us that those major armies, they realised how quickly, and with the machine guns dominating. And to that parallel, just touch upon that for us, because one thing that strikes me is President Zelensky, a few days ago, he was in Ireland. He was asked, it wasn't a tank, but it was effectively an armoured personnel carrier. I think it was a 27 RG-32M light tactical armoured vehicles, to be precise. He said he wouldn't take them, thanks but no thanks, because the refurb cost needed is better to spend them on drones instead.
Well, yeah, the whole arithmetic of the war is changing. And just going back to the example of artillery, an artillery shell, a domed shell, costs about 7,000 euros in Europe now. And you need many of them to hit a target. And they don't go very far. Well, a drone that is guided by AI and can go 150 kilometers now costs maybe 20,000 euros. And they arrive right on the target. So you suddenly are much more efficient for a lot less money with this new technology. But again, all these things coexist because drones don't necessarily fly in bad weather, so you still need artillery. And if you look at the history, well, gunpowder and horses, coexisted for a very long time, for 2-3 centuries. And so there will be some of the existing systems, existing technologies that will move into the future of warfare. The question is how will they be adopted and integrated with all this new world of where everyone is seen in the battlefield because you have sensors everywhere, and where decisions are more and more autonomous because the speed with which AI can pilot a drone is much faster than the speed of a human.
I want to mention something which you can take us into a little bit more, because we've got this vast kill zone, what used to be the front line. And thanks to Dom Nichols on Ukraine, the latest, on the Telegraph, a friend of this programme, like you on the World This Week often, he points to something that you may have seen. This as an open source analyst called Dead Districts, who's been quoting recently this Russian military blogger from the front lines called Romanov. And he's been describing a new tactic used by Ukrainian forces to get through the so-called kill zone. So this is his note basically to other Russians. He talks about basically single movements, vehicle movements, are fairly rarely encountered now in comparison, he said, to infantry personnel moving light, moving quickly to covert positions. And he gives an example of it, basically saying that personnel are moving through the kill zone, they're carrying very light equipment, and then supplies are being delivered by air. So this is not basically a rundown position where the troops are exhausted. They are picking up, they're basically armour, drones, heavy weapons, Starlink satellite as well, equipment. This apparently is a drone, it's called the Baba Yerba drone. After receiving it, the teams make the push. So we're seeing this basically complete transformation of movement, and it's surprising the Russians. Is that your understanding?
I mean, absolutely. But, this has been a case now for several months, and not just for the Ukrainian side. Look at the past of warfare. If you had 20, 30 soldiers holed up in a building, encircled in a town, they would have to surrender within days or weeks because they would run out of water and ammunition. Well, in the Ukrainian once occupied city of Kupiansk, there was such a small unit of Russian troops holed up for close to a year, because the Russians were able to resupply them with drones. Using these drones, they would drop ammunition, drop food, drop water, and it took a very long time for Ukrainian defenders to be able to clear out that neighborhood. And so all these basic concepts of warfare are being changed by these new technologies. Such as how do you encircle a city if you can resupply it with drones?
To the extent of the question evolution versus revolution, for those you spoke to, experts, for those professors, those within the industry, in the military industry, where are they sitting right now? Is there a real split about whether this is a revolution we're seeing in warfare?
Well, I think it doesn't really matter. Is it a revolution or revolution? Everybody knows you have to adjust to the reality.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that it's not so much the technology that is important right now, but the speed with which you could tweak and adjust this technology just as your enemy comes up with something new. And so this ability to be fast is going to determine who's going to win the next wars. And I think on this there's an agreement. Obviously, there are some companies, the legacy defense giants that have the order books filled up for the next 10, 15 years. And they are finding it very hard to move quickly. And there are others, a lot of startups that are growing up, have grown up as a result of these wars, that are operating very differently. And in effect, what is happening also because of the war in Ukraine is that your weapon is now becoming almost like a subscription. If you remember, you used to buy Microsoft Office and it was a product, and then now all of a sudden it's an annual subscription. Well, the same becomes with weapons because of the speed of change and the need to adjust them constantly. So defense companies increasingly are offering this sort of model. And it works really well in Ukraine because in Ukraine you have a system where individual brigades can work directly with weapons manufacturers. They can basically score points through the military action and then convert these points into cash, and then have representatives of defense firms on the front line working with them. And it's in sort of symbiosis. And I think that is the future of the military industry, because you cannot just sell a system and then wash your hands of it, because it will become obsolete very fast.
One thing that you point out in your piece, which I find fascinating, just some of the specific examples of the development. So autonomous Ukrainian-operated drones, these are supplied by a German manufacturing company, Helsing. They patrol the highways of occupied southern Ukraine, and basically, is this right? They're looking for targets, fuel trucks using AI pattern recognition, and then they pursue them on their own, entirely separate to human operation once they've been authorized by the operator.
Right. It's not just Helsing. I mean, there are several other companies doing this. It's just one of the manufacturers, but there is a fleet of these drones, and they've been instrumental not just in cutting off Russian logistics to Crimea and making it very difficult for the Russian military to operate there, but also in weakening the front line of the Russian troops, because it's harder and harder to resupply them. And so and that's probably the reason for why Ukraine has been able to reverse the tide of war in the last several months, because it suddenly extended the kill zone, in effect, from 30, 40 kilometers to 150, maybe 200.
And what you do within this piece, often we don't get to see because they don't always grant the interviews, is speak to the AI chiefs. So you had a conversation with Lewis Mosley at Palantir. Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, Palantir is very involved in the Ukrainian war effort, as it is involved in the Israeli and American campaigns against Iran. And the leaders of Palantir have come to Kiev to meet President Zelensky. And for Ukraine, it's very important to be able to also use AI and technologies to operate and create the target lists, also for the long-range campaign. Because let's not forget that in addition to these middle-range drones, Ukraine is also firing several hundred drones deep into Russia, striking refineries, striking military targets. All of these drones have to plot the movements around the Russian air defense bubbles, around known Russian capabilities. And so all of this is using a lot of data. And I think, what exactly companies like Palantir are doing is obviously not public, but it is public that they are helping in that effort.
You're in Dubai. It's not just, obviously, you touched upon this right at the start, affecting Ukraine. What we're seeing effectively playing out in the Strait of Hormuz, this tug of war between Iran and the US, whether you use the north lane by Larak Island, on the Iranian side or the south, hugging the coast of Oman. Again, it's drone warfare that is currently the key factor for the Iranians in the course of this conflict.
And actually, it's interesting because we're seeing the very same technique used at the same time by the Iranians in the Strait of Hormuz, where they do have presence on one of the shores, to use drones to kind of strike passive vehicles. They strike them with limited warheads. They're not trying to sink them, but to warn them off and to make sure nobody is traversing this strait without the Iranian permission. At the same time, you're having a Ukrainian campaign in the Azov Sea, which is used by the Russians to supply Crimea, and the northern and western shores of the sea are occupied Ukrainian territory. But Ukraine doesn't have any presence on that shore, and still from more than 100 kilometers away, it's able to basically bring to a standstill all traffic there too, because Russia stopped maritime services, sort of commercial traffic in the Sea of Azov a couple of days ago, as a result of several dozen Russian vessels being hit there by Ukrainian drones. So this is a capability that is changing how you impose blockades. It's changing how you manage war. And conventional navies, be it the U.S. Navy in the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Sea or the Russian Black Sea Navy, so far don't seem to be able to find a counter to this drone threat and to reopen those straits, be it the Strait of Kerch or the Strait of Hormuz traffic.
Going back to Ukraine briefly, Yaroslav, something else that people, I think, should know, because this is fascinating that doesn't get reported, is how very different the procurement system is for Ukraine compared to European procurement. Because you talk about in this piece brigades that are allocated, quote, E-points, so based on how many Russian soldiers, how many pieces of successful equipment are hit, this can be converted into money. How is this working?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a system called Brave One, and it was set up in August last year, but by the Ukrainian Defense Minister, Mikhail Fedorov. And basically, every engagement and almost every engagement in this war is being filmed because there are always drones hovering in the air. And so it's easy for military units, such as brigades or regiments, to document most of their hits. And so then there is a system under which these brigades are allocated money, and they convert these points into the money that then is being paid to defense companies to provide equipment to them directly. And obviously, all the Ukrainian units and defense manufacturers are integrated into this single system called Delta. So they have this kind of classified Amazon marketplace where they can use these points to purchase what they need. But obviously, it's not just purchasing a good, because with this comes the visit by the engineers and the technicians to the front line, and then they work together directly with these defense companies. And this is mostly for drones and electronic warfare technologies. And this has been really enabling the success of the Ukrainian military because of this speed of innovation and yes. baked in.
How it's exactly that it's moving
and
fast. Let me also
it's also created this ecosystem where Ukraine has a large number. Yeah, it has also created this ecosystem in which Ukraine has a very large number of various defense companies that are competing with each other, and this is a mechanism for how the best products, find the market share and get then adopted by other units, which is a contrast to what the Russians are trying to do, because there you have a very centralized system of procurement. This is sort of your classic, big country military procurement system, in which, and that is the reason why the Russian military, despite a much closer relationship with China, despite much better access to chips and electronics from China, still is lagging behind the Ukrainians when it comes to drone warfare.
It is. It suggests how nimble it is. And when you hear, or I hear from certain military chiefs in the UK or in France, they might talk about getting permission via BAE Systems or Boeing, and things take time because you need official recognition rather than going through smaller outfits, so many independent outfits that are growing. Yaroslav, it's always great to talk to you. A quick word before we depart, before you go, on what you're making of this reshuffle, the sudden ousting or resignation of the Prime Minister. What's your take?
Well, it is definitely very sudden, and I think the biggest questions Ukrainians are asking themselves now is, will the defense minister, who's been so successful in this job, stay there? And as your correspondent has said, it depends on what happens in the Ukrainian parliament. At the end of the day, however, in the Ukrainian presidential system during wartime, pretty much the entire power remains with President Zelensky. And so in the Ukrainian system, being moved from minister to advisor in the presidential administration is actually a promotion. And so I think the general lines, not much will change no matter who's the next prime minister.
Yaroslav, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Yaroslav
Great to be
Trofinov.
back.
Thank you. Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent for Wall Street Journal and author of No Country